top 5 World Chess Championships that never happened. There's also an article by Nathaniel Green written on August 16th, 2021. So this article is 2 days ago, and it says, no chess event is more important than the World Championship. Questionable, I have to say, these days. I think there was a certain event that was very, very much more important than the World Championship that happened last June. But anyway, let's keep going. This November, GM Magnus Carlson will face off against his challenger GM Jan Nepomniachtchi for the crown. It is the next of dozens of matches throughout history we've been able to witness at the game's highest stage. Even matches that happened a century ago can still be enjoyed today thanks to game notation. Alright, so there's Nepo and Magnus. But what about matchups we didn't see? Wilhelm Steinitz and Isidor Gunsberg had a match in 1890, but we couldn't get the ones that followed below. Well, no one said life is fair. We're going to stick with matchups that would not have required time travel to happen, with one semi-exception. Everyone would love to know how players of the past would match up with those in the present, but that's it for a different discussion. Okay. Lasker versus Pillsbury and or Rubinstein. Harry Pillsbury came out of nowhere to win the famous 1895 Hastings tournament, and he did it with some of the most accurate chess that had ever been played up to that point. Roughly the equivalent of a modern grandmaster, but in an era of minimal opening theory and no computers. Pillsbury, who along with Frank Marshall and GM Samuel Reshevsky and GM Reuben Fine would belong in a Mount Rushmore of American players active between Paul Morphy and GM Bobby Fischer, eventually reached an equal lifetime score against the reigning world champion Emanuel Lasker, 5-5 with 4 draws. Alright, so there's a classic game that Pillsbury won against Lasker in 1896. I'm not going to go through the whole thing because we're trying to get through an article. Unfortunately, Lasker accepted no new challengers between 1896 and 1907, and Pillsbury passed away in 1906 from syphilis, already some years past his prime. But he still got one last shot at Lasker and won their game at Cambridge Springs, Pennsylvania in 1904. From 1907 to 1910, Lasker did play 4 World Championship matches, facing 4 players who themselves never became champion: Marshall, Siegbert, Tarrasch, Karl Schlechter, and David Janowski. Lasker beat Marshall and Janowski 8-0 each, and Tarrasch 8-3, while barely retaining his title against Schlechter in a 1-1 match. In the middle of that run, he met a fifth such never became world champion player at St. Petersburg 1909, probably the strongest of the 5, Akiba Rubinstein, who won an instant classic. Alright, so what are they saying exactly? It ended up being the first of just 7 meetings between Lasker and Rubinstein, with Lasker ahead but only 2-1 with 4 draws. The two were set to play for the championship before World War I broke out. Out of money after the war, when cash for the prize fund was the most important attribute a potential challenger could have, Rubinstein never got his match and his play gradually declined. Lasker instead met and lost to Jose Raul Capablanca in 1921. That loss ended Lasker's 27-year reign as world champion, which is still the longest ever. Had he ever faced Pillsbury or Rubinstein, it may have been cut short and the course of chess history changed. Capablanca versus Ali Ekken in the rematch. Yes, 2 players who once contested the world championship are in an article about players who never contested the world championship. When Capablanca played Alexander Ali Ekken in 1927, Ali Ekken won in an upset. At 34 games, it was the longest decisive world championship match in chess history. The only longer one was the 1984 match between GM Garry Kasparov and GM Anatoly Karpov that ended without result after 48 games. Kasparov and Karpov wound up playing 144 games in 5 world championship matches and 193 times overall. Can you imagine if we ever got half that many Capablanca Ali Ekken games? It would never have been quite that many, but still. Instead, we had to settle for 51 title games between Ali Ekken and GM Efim Bogolyubov. Just 2 years after facing Capablanca, Ali Ekken defended his title, but chose Bogolyubov as his challenger instead. Bogo was wiped out by Ali Ekken 11-5 with 9 draws. Ali Ekken then waited 5 years to defend again, and he chose his opponent Bogolyubov again. This is like if Carlson got to pick his opponent and kept playing against. Okay, it's hard to get out of the sentence without insulting somebody, so just pick your least favorite GM in the world's top 25 to 30. Anyway, 1934 saw Bogolyubov get crushed again. 8-3 was 15 draws. Okay. A year later, Ali Ekken played another match underdog Max Oiva. At least this opponent refused to fold, and Oiva in fact won a close one 9-8 with 13 draws. Ali Ekken took back the title 2 years later, and World War II broke out 2 years after that. Capablanca continued to angle for his rematch into the fall of 1939, seemingly convinced in October that it would happen. It didn't happen, and he passed away in 1942. So who would have won? We'll never know. Obviously, while Capablanca held a 9-7 lifetime edge, even with his disastrous World Championship result, most of his success had happened before World War I. Okay. Capablanca's edge decreased after the war, but he still hadn't lost to Ali Ekken when the title match began. He even won a 5th game at the New York tournament earlier in the year, but that was followed almost immediately by the big upset, and Capablanca never played for the World Championship again. History tends to blame Ali Ekken for this, and the bitterness between Capablanca and Ali Ekken was such that neither played at the same tournament again until 1936, nearly a decade later. For Capablanca, who won their game in Nottingham that year, it had to do. Wow. They just played just 3 times total after 1927 with an even 1-1-1 score, and so it's impossible to say who would have won a rematch. That makes the lack of one even more disappointing, considering also that whoever won would have given their historical reputation a major boost. Most people rate Ali Ekken behind Capablanca historically, despite the result of their one match. 2 match wins for Ali Ekken, and that surely would not have happened. Meanwhile, if Capablanca had won the rematch and kept the title the rest of his life, perhaps with a successful defense against Oiva, he would have a much stronger case as the greatest chess player ever, instead of the top 5 to top 10 where he usually is. So many questions remain unanswered. They couldn't have played a quick 10 games of Blitz. No, they played slow chess even back then, you guys. Tal versus Petrossian. This matchup would have been an epic clash of styles between the attacker GMHikaru Tal and the great defender GM Tigran V Petrossian. In fact, they each have an argument as being the single greatest attacker and single greatest defender of all time, respectively. This doesn't mean they sometimes didn't crush each other. Here's Tal beating up on Petrossian, and here's Petrossian routing Tal. The dream match almost happened. Depending on how inevitable you think World War I was, and how willing you think Fischer actually was to defend his title in 1975, Tal Petrossian arguably came the closest to happening of any match in this article. Petrossian defeated, you guys, you probably noticed that. I saw it too. It's like, depending on how inevitable you think World War I was. I could go on about the Archduke and all that other stuff, but I don't want to. Petrossian defeated GMHikaru Venice in 1963 to become world champion. Tal reached the finals of the 1965 Canada's tournament against GM Boris Spassky. Unfortunately for Tal, Spassky won their match 7-4 and faced Petrossian in 1966. Petrossian won that match before losing to Spassky in 1969, a match Tal again almost qualified for by reaching the Canada semifinals, where he lost to GM Viktor Korchnoi, who lost to Spassky, who beat Petrossian, who, no wait, that's the end of the process. Alright, some more pictures. The lifetime score between Tal and Petrossian, counting exhibitions blitz, was 5-5 with 36 draws. It would have been an epic World Championship match, no doubt producing multiple brilliancies as the unstoppable force of Tal met the immovable object of Petrossian. And if Tal had become world champion a second time, there's no telling where he'd be ranked among the best chess players in history, which is currently generally somewhere around 10th. Alright, so those 2 matches both, I guess, should have happened, obviously, but now we get to the ones that 100% should have happened. Karpov versus Fischer. This is the obvious one everybody talks about. To this day, more than 45 years later, people still debate who would have won. Karpov can't seem to get out of an interview without being asked about it. This is also the only match on the list where the would-be contestants never played each other in any situation, let alone a championship, only adding to the intrigue. Technically speaking, this match did happen and Fischer forfeited. He attempted to take some old-school control over the championship process as the active title holder. Fischer could not pick his challenger, but he could try to change the match format. FIDE was fine with switching from best of 24 to first to 10 wins, but was not in favor of Fischer's demand that he retain the title in a 9-9 tie, and that was that. All right, another picture. Where Tal Petrossian would have been a clash of playing styles, and the later Kasparov-Karpov matches were, Fischer-Karpov would have been an interesting study of what happens when world-class players with similar styles meet. If Fischer's chess had a defining characteristic, it was the ability to find counterintuitive moves in the right moment. Examples include 18 knight takes g2 against GM Robert Byrne in 1963, 13 king takes e7 against GM Milan Matulovic in 1968, and 22 knight takes d7 against Petrossian in 1971. Fischer needed a very keen positional sense to know exactly when to break the general principles of chess, yet perhaps no player is better known for a keen positional sense than Karpov. Sometimes we talk too much about positional chess as an alternative of sorts to tactical chess, and clearly Fischer and Karpov had to be great tacticians to become world champions, but watching these two trying to find all the tiniest subtleties in a position and squeezing the other, and only then perhaps finding the satisfying tactical finish, would have been fascinating. But Fischer gave it and Fischer took it away. While he was going 3 years without a single competitive chess game, Karpov was busy qualifying in candidates matches against GMs Lev Polugaevsky, Spassky, and Korchnoi. With hindsight, it's not surprising that this match never happened. No player can sustain the run Fischer went on from 1969 to 1972, and Karpov was too good to not become champion eventually. It would just have been great to see it all play out over the board. What I would say about this specifically, about this one is that this match was never going to happen. I think when Fischer became world champion, he had reached the pinnacle of where he wanted to get to, and there's just no way that that match was ever going to happen. Even if people wanted to, there would have been some way out. All right, let's keep going. Next up, we have Kasparov versus Carlson. Okay. When Kasparov ended his competitive chess career in March 2005, he was still the top-rated player in the world, as he had been for a whopping 20 years. His retirement was followed by a 5-year period of GMs Viswanathan Anand, Vladimir Kramnik, and Veselin Topalov trading the #1 spot. That ended when Carlson took the lead position in 2010. He has yet to relinquish it. All right. This is the only match on this list that could not have logistically happened in the timeline we live in. But suppose Kasparov was born just 2 years later and Carlson 2 years earlier. Now maybe a younger Kasparov does not become world champion until 1987, or maybe 1987 is the new 1984. But we didn't change Karpov's age, you know. Then perhaps, without the disillusionment of his 1984 to 86 matches with Karpov, Kasparov never splits from FIDE. That in itself is a major and welcome change in this timeline, but I digress. All right. Now all we would need is for Kasparov to hold the title until Carlson arrived in 2008 instead of 2010, when Magnus became world #1. Maybe Kramnik never gets a match with Kasparov in a normal cycle, and that's all this timeline needs for our match to happen. Or perhaps Kramnik takes it in 1999, Anand in 2002, and Kasparov takes it back in 2005. Whatever the situation, we just need Kasparov to win in 2005. He ain't going to retire in the middle of a championship reign. While we never got to see Kasparov and Carlson face off in their primes, we have seen them play on occasion. This year, before Kasparov retired, he met Carlson in a rapid tournament in Reykjavik. The year before Kasparov retired, he met Carlson in a rapid tournament in Reykjavik. Carlson was only 13 years old and still an IM. He lost a game, but also a draw. All right, so there's a video, of course. I think everybody's seen it. We also saw Carlson and Kasparov face off in Chess 960 in 2020 when they drew in 55 moves. By that point, of course, Kasparov was long retired while Carlson was in the midst of his title run. It really needs no explanation why a match between Pete Kasparov and Pete Carlson would have been epic. They were named the top 2 best players in history by Chess.com in 2020, and that's close enough after also considering how close their peaks came to overlapping. The most overlap on that list is #1 Kasparov against #5 Karpov, and it was a lot of overlap for which we should be grateful. The next best combo is #4 Capablanca against #8 Lasker, who were rivals for about 20 years, unless you want to count Capablanca's brief efforts against #6 Botvinnik in the late 1930s. Okay, so I mean, most of that previous part about Kasparov was just very the what ifs that I didn't even understand. But it's what it is. But number one, but number one versus number two would have been amazing. It's getting a bit late for Magnus to meet his match, unless perhaps he and Nepomniachtchi are able to meet in several title bouts beyond 2021. Honorable mentions: Botvinnik Reshevsky. The Cold War drama of 1972 could have happened in the 1950s if Reshevsky had won a Canada's tournament to face Botvinnik. He finished joint second at Zurich 1953, amid numerous later reports that the Soviets had colluded to stop him. 2 years later, Reshevsky got a match against Botvinnik anyway as part of a USSR versus the world event. In 4 games, Reshevsky won 1 and drew 3. However, the lifetime score was 5-2 in Botvinnik's favor, with 7 draws, including 3-1-1 in the 1948 World Championship match. Alright, Botvinnik versus Ali Ekken. The match was agreed to after World War II, but it became somewhat difficult to consummate when Ali Ekken died in 1946. If he had survived to play Botvinnik, how much longer would the old World Championship system of handpicked challengers have continued? Instead, FIDE had the opportunity to take over the process. In 3 games they played between 1936 and 1938 at the same Nottingham and Avro event. In 3 games they played between 1936 and 1938 at the same Nottingham and Avro events that finally forced Ali Ekken and Capablanca to play again. Botvinnik defeated Ali Ekken once with 2 draws. Smithslav versus Tal. If Smithslav had held his Botvinnik rematch in 1958, this is likely the match we would have seen in 1960 when they did play, Smithslav's solidarity was a bit much for Tal's dynamicism, and Smithslav held a 5-3 edge with 21 draws. Alright, conclusion. History is full of what-ifs. Even after the regular World Championship cycle was developed and we stopped getting Ali Ekken and Bogolyubov travesties in the World Championship, there were several missed opportunities for great championship matches that would surely have brought excitement and intrigue. I think Ali Ekken or Ali Ekken, I mean, there are many different ways of pronouncing it, but anyway, that's it. This article is okay. What I would say is the only match on this whole list that really is intriguing is the third one, the one between the potential match between Bobby Fischer and Anatoly Karpov. That's the one that I think everyone wishes had happened. The others feel much more like what ifs for the most part. That's the only one that I think legitimately should have happened. That's the one that would have been most hype.